Kansas takes down Colorado at Arrowhead Stadium on senior night, 37-21. We're going to break it all down coming up next.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Paid all who enter, and beware this live edition of the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network from Arrowhead Stadium. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. You know who should pay heed, Kevin, is Coach Prime. Coach Prime needs to pay heed, is who needs to pay heed, as Kansas football takes down Colorado 37-21 on senior day here at Arrowhead Stadium. If you're joining us live, be sure to drop a comment, share your thoughts, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can drop a like, drop a comment as well. If you're listening or watching after the fact, you can still drop a comment, share your thoughts, leave us a 5-star rating and review. Subscribe wherever you watch and or listen to the show, as it helps us continue to grow here on Kansas City Sports Network. And as always, we're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. Kevin, during the preview show, I had specifically told you, hey, sometimes in certain games, in certain moments with certain players, the game plan be damned, you just give the ball to a specific guy or you let a specific player do his thing, right? That's exactly what ended up happening in this game. I think Kansas did it perfectly by giving the ball to Devin Neal 30-plus times, and it worked out to perfection on senior day. He carries KU to a win.
30-plus, 40-plus. He had 37 carries and 4 catches, so 41 touches. So, Devin, if you're watching, get that ice bath.
Yeah,
soak up.
Get in the ice bath.
Get some rest. Don't leave your recovery to chance. Best game of Devin Neal's career, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the Oklahoma State game when he was a sophomore, that Kansas really had to have in order to go to a bowl game that year, and he played one of those, you would call it, I guess, an over my dead body game, had over 200 yards rushing, had over 100 yards receiving. In this one, Nick, he had 200-plus yards rushing, wound up with 207, had 80 receiving, but he also found the end zone 4 different times. And even beyond that, Nick, let's throw the numbers away for a minute. Every time Kansas had to have a play, whether it was needing a big play, whether it was, hey, it's 4th and 1 and we need you to get this 1 yard, Devin Neal was there and made that play.
Yeah, I mean, look, we talked about it during our pre-show of if you get into just an absolute track meet shootout with this Colorado team, like that's probably not a recipe to win the game, right? Like the smart way to win this game if you're Kansas, or the strategy to win this game, Lance Leipold talked about it on Postgame Radio actually just as we were going live here, of, hey, look, we needed to establish the run game, we needed to be physical in the line of scrimmage, and we needed to play a possession type of game. And that is exactly what Kansas did, Kevin. Yeah. Kansas possessed this ball for over 40 minutes of game time. I mean,
Kansas still has the ball right now.
Yeah.
Like if you're watching Kansas like down in the locker room, they have the football. So if you're looking for the game ball, Kansas is still possessing the football.
Yeah, a truly remarkable performance. And I think if you were Lance Leipold and you went to bed last night and you had the perfect dream of the type of offensive performance that you would want your team to have, this was it. 40-plus minutes of possession time. Devin Neal obviously having a huge game. Jalen Daniels with a couple of key scrambles and some big runs as well throughout the game. Also, did just enough from the quarterback position really to get KU in position. And look, I mean, this is even in spite of the fact that Kansas really fumbled away a chance to score 3 more touchdowns in the red zone. I mean, they had the ball inside the 10 3 times and kicked the field goal 3 times. So an absolutely unbelievable performance offensively for Kansas that really carried the day. And it starts and ends with Devin Neal.
Yeah, no doubt. And it started and ended with Devin Neal both as a runner and as a receiver. When you look at the way that they involved him in the passing game, Jalen Daniels throws for 189 yards. 80 of those were to Devin Neal. He was KU's leading receiver in addition to all the work he did on the ground. But I also want to give a little bit of a shout out to Jeff Grimes on this thing, just in that this wasn't just Kansas running HB dive, as you say all the time, over and over a game. And they ran that when they needed to, but there was some creativity in there. When you look at the one carry that I really liked was when you had him next to Jalen Daniels, motioned both of them over. He takes a direct snap. He fakes the handoff to Jalen Daniels and then scoops up the sideline for a really big gain. they got him the ball in a lot of different ways. The offensive line obviously did a lot of work. I thought that Kansas was the more physical and more aggressive team in this one. And when we looked at this game heading in, Nick, I thought Kansas had to be that in order to win. And
yeah, for sure.
And when you look at where they've been successful with Lance Leipold as head coach, I know I told you a year ago I talked to a coach on a different Big 12 staff, and he said, hey, KU last year was the most physical team that we played all year. I would venture to guess that Colorado might be saying the same thing about this one if you poured some true serum down the Buffalo's throats. Kansas came out, they were breaking tackles, they were moving guys in the run game as well. Just a really physical performance. And on the other side of the ball, and I know we're going to stick with the offense, the defense did enough. They got some good stops. And when you look at Colorado's rushing numbers, Colorado ran for 42 yards, but even that's a little deceiving. 26 of those came on Shedeur Sanders' scrambles.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it from that, having 16 yards tops off designed running plays, Brian Borland's group did their job against the run, and they got just enough stops against the pass to make that offense play up.
Yeah, I do want to get more into the defense a little bit later,
Yeah.
but when you talk about this offense and what they did for KU, Kevin, it started at the very beginning with the Devin Neal 51-yard touchdown pass on a swing route from Jalen Daniels, and they just kept going from there. With that touchdown, by the way, at the start of the game, Kevin, KU has scored an opening drive touchdown on 6 of their last 7 games, right?
Yep.
Everyone wants to talk about Jeff Grimes, and we're going to certainly talk about him on this show. On the positive side for Jeff Grimes, think about that for a moment. He has clearly shown that he has figured out what he wants to do early in games to script for this offense to be successful. I mean, 6 opening drive touchdowns in the last 7 games for Kansas. The only game that they didn't score an opening drive touchdown on was Iowa State.
And what happened? What happened on the second drive?
They immediately scored on the second drive. Immediately scored on the second drive, and they arguably could have scored on the first drive if they would have tried to go for it on that fourth down play against Iowa State. So tremendous stuff from Jeff Grimes in terms of scripting plays and putting this offense in position to be successful early in games. Now we can get to some of the other stuff in the red zone and whatnot, but at the end of the day, listen, if you're clamoring for Devin Neal to get the ball, he got it 37 times, 41 times total in this game, and that's exactly what KU did. But yeah, the first half, Kevin, was again a bit interesting. KU gets up 17-0. And then eventually Colorado would fight back a little bit. And certainly I think there was some tension in terms of kicking the field goals in the first half for KU.
Yeah, without a doubt. When you have those 3 trips, not just in the red zone, but inside the
5.
10.
Yeah, inside the 10, inside the 5. Yeah.
And so when you have those long drives, I don't think KU – I have to check real quick on the final drive where they wound up taking a knee. Yeah, the final drive was the only drive of the game that they didn't put up at least 61 yards on the drive. And the only reason they didn't put it up then was they literally took a knee to run out the clock. And so they moved the ball at will through this thing. And so when you're doing that, when you're getting inside the 10, and when you're doing it, Nick, against such an explosive offensive team with the weapons that Colorado has, it gets a little worrisome when you have 3 field goals on drives that wind up inside the 10. And some of that, you can maybe attribute to play calling. Certainly people wanted to keep running it. I know one of those 3 drives, they actually gave it to Savion Morrison on first down. He had like a 3-yard loss or something, and then wound up throwing it a couple times because you had like second and goal from the 13. Yeah. Another time they threw it once, ran it again, and then they were a ways off, so you wound up throwing it again. And so I do think, yes, running the ball was the plan. And credit to Jeff Grimes, to your point, I think they adjusted over the course of the game where when they got inside the 10, it was less about, hey, let's be open and more about let's continue to feed what's working in here. And they closed out with touchdown when they needed those things in the second half. And so I do think they adjusted there, but there was definitely some tension in the stadium, some tension probably in the press box, and certainly I'm sure tension for you guys watching if you weren't in the stadium, where you're sitting here saying, man, for the offense going through this defense like a hot knife through butter, you've got to get more points in those situations.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, listen, the first half, that first field goal drive from Kansas, I mean, Oh, you can't draw it up any better. 13 plays, 61 yards, 7:46 off the clock for a field goal. Obviously, those are drives where you'd like to have touchdowns.
Sure.
So the first drive, I believe, was the one that you mentioned where they got behind the chains a little bit.
Yeah.
It was 2nd and 13. Second goal from the 13. The second 2 field goal drives are the ones that I really want to kind of focus on.
Sure.
The second one was the one where on 3rd and goal, Jalen Daniels had Luke Graham wide open.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh, he was wide open. Luke Graham was literally just running basically a drag crossing route, and he had no defender within 20 yards of him in the middle of the end zone. But Jalen Daniels
he turned that pass loose really early, too, where it was if you had waited for the drag underneath, like it was, you would have seen it.
Yeah, so that's one that's a bit unfortunate. And I think on that one, the play calling was they maybe run it early on that one, and then had that 3rd down and goal play where, again, Jalen Daniels had Luke Graham, absolutely wide open for a touchdown. So that one was a little disheartening, whatever. And then it's really that one right before the end of the first half, Kevin, that I think is going to drew a lot of people's attention, which is you've got about 35 seconds left. You end up calling a timeout pretty quickly after a 12-yard run from Devin Neal down that gets you down to the 3. And then you call a second timeout after another run play. And then you have that weird pass play where it looked like Jalen Daniels was down for a sack, but he threw it away. But I guess his knee was under somebody's elbow or on top of somebody's arm or something.
Yeah.
So it ends up still being an incomplete pass. So it's like you kind of averted disaster. You still have a timeout left at that point on 3rd and goal and up for a pass.
Yeah.
When maybe you still had the option to run the ball in that situation. So I think if you want to get really gripey about the play calling, that last sequence of events at the end of the half, and look, we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but some of that, I think everyone wants to pay attention to Jeff Grimes when it comes to that. I'm not convinced if some of that isn't a conversation with him and Lance Leipold. Like if Lance Leipold is saying, hey, we need to do X with the clock or however. So I think it's a little bit of both of those guys, Lance Leipold and Jeff Grimes together, probably both messing that up, either not being in sync about what they wanted to do, about how they wanted to utilize the clock, whatever it may have been. And something I kind of tweeted about was the fact that the trips to the red zone for Kansas, it just, for whatever reason, it just felt like KU became very rushed with some of their decision-making in the red zone. In all 3 of the trips where they didn't score, it just felt like they had such a rhythm going down the field. And then for whatever reason, that rhythm was broken in the red zone, whether they felt rushed. I think they got a little bit panicky on that sequence at the end of the first half, also with calling the quick timeouts and then throwing the ball. And then, oh my gosh, what are we doing? So I think that probably factored in a little bit as well. I don't really have a solid explanation for why that's the case, for why that they, got out of rhythm basically when they got into the red zone. But at the end of the day, again, I think the halftime sense was a little nervous because you're only up 9 and Colorado's offense, how explosive it is. We saw that obviously with Travis Hunter scoring a long touchdown in the first half and then Shedeur Sanders throwing another touchdown in the first half as well. So, I think it was a little nerve-wracking for sure at the end of that first half.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when Colorado comes out in the second half,
it goes 3 minutes and a touchdown,
and gets that quick touchdown. I think if you were to be honest about it, there were probably a lot of people who thought at that point, hey, Colorado is probably going to win this game. Kansas had chances to score more points. Kansas should be further ahead. And instead, it feels like the momentum is heading all Colorado's way. But that was the thing about the offense.
They just kept going.
They just did not get stopped. And I think as much as people may have an issue with like a play call here or there, this game plan was damn near perfect.
Yeah,
and I think when you look at the creativity, the fact that Jeff Grimes is kind of in his bag, I think on some of that stuff.
The drive that spanned at the end of the third quarter and the fourth quarter, there was just some really great play calls. You had that play with the underneath to Trevor Cardell for a nice gain. There was a wheel route to Devin Neal in there as well that was executed very well. So I mean, overall, Jeff Grimes gets a solid A for his play calling in this game. Obviously, it's I'm trying to remember. I was having a conversation with somebody about this where the discussion at the time was about offensive linemen, which is if you're an offensive lineman and you play great for your offense runs 65 plays, you play great for 62 plays, and those 3 plays you mess up, you're judged off those 3 plays.
Yep.
And it kind of feels like for some people that want to be overly critical of Jeff Grimes for this game is maybe that's how they're viewing it is Jeff Grimes, yes, objectively did definitely mess up and did definitely have some errors in the red zone and a couple times for Kansas. But if you look beyond that, he was outstanding, really.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, generally speaking, if you went into this game thinking you're going to have 520 yards, you're going to have 40 minutes of possession, you're going to score 37 points, and the only reason you didn't score 40 or more is because you're kneeling to end the game, you would have been very, very happy with that offensive performance. They literally scored points on every single drive, with the exception of that final one where they took the knee. And so when you add all of those things together, just an amazing performance. We've been talking about Grimes and talked about Devin Neal. I thought Jalen played a really solid game. For the most part, took care of the ball really well. Didn't put it at risk a whole lot in this game. And running the ball, Nick, he was exceptional. Had multiple runs that had no business happening.
I don't know what it was about what was in the water for KU for this game, but everybody just wanted to hit the spin move. It was a spin move game. Jalen Daniels, multiple times where he had multiple plays with spin moves and so on and so forth. Very, very impressive from him. You had Devin Neal, you had Trevor Cardell trying to hurdle a guy. It was just chaos out there for some of those plays for KU. We did take a quick break, Kevin, but one other thing I wanted to get on the record here before we do that.
All right.
Is I was speaking with you and Shreyas Latta, who covers KU for the Kansas City Star as well in the press box for the game. And somebody had asked about Travis Hunter's final stat line.
Oh, yes.
And I had stated my prediction was 8 catches, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns. Travis Hunter finished the game with 8 catches for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he kind of did what I thought he was going to do, right? And that was kind of my thought process going into this game was, look, Travis Hunter's probably going to get his, right? Like he's probably going to do his thing just regardless, right?
He was terrific.
Yeah,
he really was.
I mean, and listen, that was just my expectation. My expectation was he's just going to have some plays where he's going to do his thing, right? And that's just how it's going to be. And KU obviously managed that and overcame it certainly, and ends up winning the game by 16 points. So, overall, very impressive win for Kansas. A bowl game is still in contention now for KU as they improved to 5-6 as well. So, great win for KU. Let's talk more about the defense, Kevin, a little bit more about this game as well when we come back on the other side of the break. As always, we got to tell you about our friends over at Home Field Apparel. Listen, there's nothing greater than wearing your Home Field Apparel after a great KU win. So you can enjoy yourself some Home Field Apparel with KU. If you're a Colorado fan in the comments and you're feeling a little bit down after this loss, we got you a cup, man. 15% off with code PAYHEAT24 over at Home Field Apparel. You can buy yourself some Colorado gear to make yourself feel a little bit better, as well as, look, Colorado's not out of the Big 12 title picture entirely with this loss, but yeah, so if you're a Colorado fan feeling down, we can hook you up. We can make you feel better. And, of course, if you're a KU fan, definitely you want to hit up Home Field Apparel for all of your KU gear. That's homefieldapparel.com. You can get 15% off your first order with code PAYHEAT24. More discussion of this game is coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partners in all things possible. If you're joining us live on YouTube, postgame here at Arrowhead Stadium, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be sure to drop a like, drop a comment, as well to share your thoughts after KU defeats Colorado 37-21 here at Arrowhead Stadium. If you're listening or watching after the fact, you can still drop a comment, still share your thoughts, still subscribe, certainly. And as we'll be continuing to cover KU on the football side, on the basketball side, National Signing Day is coming up as well. Early Signing Day, is coming up as well for KU. So plenty of action going on here on the channel on KCSN. So thanks so much to everyone for their support, for joining us throughout this season as well. Talked a lot about Devin Neal, talked a lot about Jeff Grimes. Let's get a bit more into the defense, right? We kind of touched on it a little bit there at the end. We talked about Travis Hunter, obviously still getting his. Shedeur Sanders, by the way, I thought played really well. I
thought he was great.
I thought that Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter specifically were both as advertised, right? Shedeur showed incredible pocket awareness. Brian Borland, I think, was put in a really tough position because when KU was rushing for Kevin, they were not affecting Shedeur Sanders. Yeah. He was able to perfectly maneuver through the pocket and find ways to delay. He had multiple pass attempts where he was able to hold the ball for what felt like 8, 10, 12, 15 seconds before finding a guy downfield or making a play. And on the flip side, the few times that Kansas tried to blitz, he burned them too, right?
Yep.
The second touchdown for Colorado was a blown coverage off of a blitz play. And so that was a really – those guys were really, really as advertised. Shedeur Sanders finishes, I think, 23 of 29 passing on the game for 266 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was great, right, in terms of his ability to maneuver in the pocket. That's really what most impressed me about him was maneuvering in the pocket and his ability to extend plays. And we talked about that on the preview shows that's something that he can do. That's a strength of his. And then obviously Travis Hunter as well. But once again, I mean, the Kansas defense made plays when they needed to. They got a couple 4th down stops. You know, you think about that 4th down stop very early in the game. That maybe kind of set the tone for them. And you know, it was clear that KU, they were playing for their seniors. They were playing, you know, to keep the season going, to keep the bull hope alive. And I think you have to tip your cap a little bit to the defense as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually thought I thought Travis Hunter would play well because he's really good. But I also thought where Kansas would maybe have even more trouble was going to be matching up with the number of Colorado receivers, right? That's the thing that's so tough, I think, about this team is, man, your number 2 or 3 guy is going to be on Will Shepherd. Your number 3 guy is going to be on one of those other guys. And so they've got a lot of really talented pass catchers. Draylon Miller had
really nice catches.
Had the great touchdown catch. And so that was my worry. LaJohntay Wester made a couple good plays too. And I think that was where I thought Colorado would sort of butter its bread against Kansas's defense. Is I thought that they would, you know, maybe Kobe and Mello play fairly well, but it's going to be the next guy. It's going to be when you get a receiver on a safety. It's going to be when you get a receiver on a linebacker or against your number 3 corner. And I actually thought Jalen Todd did some nice things, but defensively they got enough stops that it helped, obviously. But the big thing, Nick, was in the second half, the defense was great after that first drive that Colorado had. And I think, you know, one of the plays of the game was the pass breakup by Kobe Bryant.
Yeah, in the end zone.
On what looked like a wide open touchdown.
Yeah.
He covered a lot of ground to get there, Nick, and break up what looked like a surefire score where the game is still not out of reach at that point if Colorado gets that touchdown. Instead, he breaks it up. Colorado on the very next play, I think they jumped it was a
3rd and 17.
It sets up like a 4th and 22, and the defense winds up holding it. And so when you look at the whole picture, there were times obviously where Colorado's offense did extremely well, and there were times when Kansas's defense gave them enough stops to have that 16-point margin.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the second half, I thought you brought up a great point. Like they did what they needed to do. And Kobe Bryant, as you mentioned, that play was one of the biggest plays of the game, I think, at that point, because Colorado could have gotten back into it, you know, at that stage of the game on 3rd and 17. And Will Shepherd looked like he was wide open. And listen, Kobe Bryant, I thought had a great game. I mean, he made a couple nice tackles. He had a tackle for loss on Travis Hunter at one point in the game also. So, you know, those guys really showed up. Mello Dotson was great. Also, Cornell Wheeler, I thought, had a fantastic game, had a couple of big hits in the middle of that defense as well, making plays. And
they shut down the run extremely well, considering how spread out Colorado had them. I thought not that Colorado has struggled to run the ball this year. It's not really what they do. So it wasn't like I thought that they were going to have a ton of success in that area, but I did think they would probably be more successful than they were. Kansas's defense did an outstanding job while being outnumbered in the box. And so those guys up front deserve a lot of credit because they put Colorado behind the chains a lot. And so Colorado's offense is still good enough to make plays in those situations, but ultimately it did lead to enough stops to win this one.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Kevin, but I thought really the key drive or the best drive of the game for Kansas was that drive that spanned the 3rd quarter into the 4th quarter that put them up 16. You know, you're up at that point 30-21, and then you go on an 8-minute touchdown drive that spanned at the end of the 3rd quarter and the start of the 4th quarter. That was really demoralizing. That was the drive where Jeff Grimes, I thought, made some great play calls. Devin Neal had a couple of key runs on that drive. There was a play on that drive where it looked like he should have been tackled for like a 3-yard loss. He somehow turns it into a 28-yard gain. Then there was a horse collar on top of that that sent KU into Colorado territory. So I thought things really changed on that drive. And it was kind of funny. I posed this question on Twitter during the game of, okay, it's 30-21. Assuming KU was able to score, which they did end up scoring by feeding Devin Neal like 4 times in a row on that to end that drive for a touchdown. Assuming KU was able to score there, which they did, would you consider going for 2 to make it 38-21 and try to go up 3 scores? And mixed results. Some people said yes, some people said no. I was in the camp of maybe consider it at that point, but ultimately they ended up kicking the field goal, the extra point to go up 16, and it ended up being more than enough, as that was the final margin of victory for KU. But I thought that drive was the real difference-making drive in the game, right? I mean, if you want to talk about sort of end of half, end of game situations, end of the first half probably wasn't ideal for Kansas. And obviously this wasn't end of game, but it was, to me, essentially the drive that basically ended the game, right? Going down and scoring in that fashion with that type of drive. So to me, that was sort of the moment where I sat back and thought, okay, KU's now in the driver's seat for sure with this touchdown drive of 8 minutes going down the field and taking care of business.
Yeah, it's funny when we did our preview series where we looked back at last year's games. One of the things that felt like it was a pretty common thing in Kansas wins last year was Kansas would get the ball with, say, 5 minutes left, and they would run the ball effectively, get the first downs they needed, and run out the clock. They were running the ball really well situationally. And I thought that one of the things that was the best about this game is obviously we've seen times this year on several occasions where Kansas could have used that, whether it's West Virginia, whether it was Kansas State at the end of that game, where you really wanted the offense to kind of dig in, get a few first downs, churn out some clock, and run the ball in that end game situation. Both on that drive and then after Kansas got the stop to close out the game, Kansas ran the ball extremely well when it needed to do it. And I thought that was maybe because Kansas was playing with a lead, that was maybe an undersold part of the game. But last year, it felt like when they had somebody down, they stepped on their throat to finish the game with the running game, and they did that again today.
I mean, look, we talked about it, Kevin. The best way to not lose a one-score game is to not be in a one-score game, right? You win by 16, you win by 2 scores. You don't have to worry about it being a one-score game as well. So I do want to kind of take a step back here, macro perspective, look at Lance Leipold, right?
Yeah.
Lance Leipold, we've talked about it a little bit here and there over the course of the past couple of games, but I think when you think about him as a coach, yes, there are some things that he leaves to be desired with some of his maybe game management type situations and things like that. But at the end of the day, to rally this team the way he has and to bring them into this senior day game, to now play a 4th consecutive ranked opponent, and you've gone 3-1, arguably should have gone 4-0 by beating K-State, a game that you kind of let slip away. Really, really impressive stuff. Kansas had never beaten consecutive ranked opponents ever in the entire history of the program. They've now beaten 3 in a row with Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado. So really, really impressive stuff from Lance Leipold. Yeah,
it was a brutal stretch, and you're looking at it with Kansas being, 2-6, and you're saying, man, there's no way they come out of this stretch and wind up being bowl eligible, and yet here they are, Nick, and they're not bowl eligible yet, but they're going into the final week with a chance to go to a bowl. They're playing as well as anybody, and I think that's such a testament not just to Lance Leipold, but to the whole coaching staff, the culture that they've instilled here. And they swore up and down, and we've talked about this, that, hey, we haven't lost the locker room. Guys are still showing up to work, even though they've been really unlucky. Didn't love it, but I thought the stat was interesting a week ago when you look at that luck metric. And number 1 in the country was BYU heading into the game, and dead last in FBS football was Kansas. And so when you're not just losing games, but losing games that it feels like, my gosh, it was right. Why do we keep losing these?
Yeah.
It would have been really easy to lose that locker room. And I think that the players deserve a lot of credit. I think the coaches deserve a lot of credit because they just, insert whatever coaching cliche you want to here in terms of, row the boat or, stay the course or whatever. They did an amazing job of staying locked in. And right now they're playing their best football at the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think it is a little bit maddening to think, man, you just ran through 4 straight games against 4 of the top teams in the Big 12. You beat 3 of them, including BYU on the road, who was previously undefeated. You played K-State in Manhattan and should have won that game also. And you could have been in a position to be in the discussion for the Big 12 title, right? Like, that's the most frustrating thing. Like, I look at the schedule for KU and, like, forget about non-conference, right? Like, who cares about Illinois? Who cares about UNLV? Whatever. That doesn't matter. When you look in conference, all Kansas really would have had to do was not choke away against West Virginia and get one stop against Arizona State, and they would be right there. They would be right in the conversation, right? Forget about TCU and forget about K-State. If you can still lose those games, I think those are the two that's really, most frustrating to me is, gosh, you had an 11-point lead with 4 minutes left against West Virginia. You lose that game. You lose, obviously, the Arizona State game on the last-second touchdown.
When you had back-to-back comeback drives in that one, the offense scores a drive to take a lead. Arizona State goes right back down, takes the lead back. Then you go down and take the lead back with the touchdown pass from Jaylen Daniels to Quentin Skinner, and then you wind up. Yeah, it's frustrating from that standpoint because you can really, without imagination, really,
you can make the argument that
this is the argument that
best team in the conference.
Yeah,
or one top 2 certainly. Which if you're top 2, you're in the Big 12 title game.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's really kind of the heart of the issue. Is like you don't have to think very hard to look around the conference and say, man, this KU team is one of the top 2 teams in the conference. I mean, you just beat 3 of the other top 3 teams in the conference consecutively. So that's what's kind of frustrating about it. But I will say, like, I am really, really happy, I guess, about the fact that this senior class specifically for KU has obviously meant so much, right? So many of these guys, Devin Neal, Jeremy Robinson, even Jaylen Daniels, even some of those other guys. I mean, man, what they got, what they had when they first got to KU versus where they're leaving now, like, it's still incredible. And I'm really happy that they're able to have a positive ending to that, right? Like, it would have been such a shame to have a player like Devin Neal, go out with a 3-9 season or something like that, right? With what the type of impact that he's had on this program. Jaylen Daniels, Jeremy Robinson, Bryce Cable-Dew, 4, 5, 6-year guys on this roster. I'm just really, really happy that they were able to have a very gratifying end to that, right? And obviously the journey's not over. You can still go and beat Baylor and still go on to win another bowl game potentially if you're Kansas, but considering the expectations and then kind of considering where things were at the midpoint of the season, to still have that positive ending to it that these guys really deserve, right? I mean, Devin Neal deserved this game, right? He deserved this type of senior day. And obviously it's not happening in Lawrence, unfortunately, because of the new stadium, but still, he's a guy that really deserved this level of play. Kevin, we had 30 plus seniors. I've never seen it before. The senior day ceremony spanned the entire field. There were so many seniors and so many families on the field. Like, and so many of those guys have impacted this program in so many different ways positively. And that's my biggest takeaway is, like, you think about where this program was when a lot of those guys got on campus back in 2020 or 2021, or even 2019 in some cases, where it is now. I'm very, very pleased and happy that those guys can walk off the field here and say, hey, look, maybe this season didn't start the way we wanted it to, but we're going to finish it the way we want to, with big wins and maybe even still a chance in a bowl game and leave it on the field. With the type of performance that we saw today.
You could pretty much go down that senior lineup and point to something that each guy has done. Even some of the guys that transferred in just for this year, right? Yes. Dylan Woodkey was terrific against BYU. Shane Bumgarner gave them some really important reps on the offensive line earlier this year. And then you get to the guys that have been here, like Jaylen Daniels going through the senior day stuff. That doesn't necessarily mean anything for those of you watching. Jason Bean just a couple years ago went through the senior day festivities. Of course, didn't play well in the bowl game. The one play that he got, decided to come back. And so there's the option for Jaylen Daniels to still come back for Kansas next year. Devin Neal, commits to Kansas under Les Miles. And that 2020 season, the whole year that he was committed, Kansas didn't win a football game, in 2020. And so when you look at that and look at the receivers, Quentin Skinner coming in as a walk-on, LJ Arnold coming in as a Les Miles guy. Luke Grimm was a guy that Kansas initially recruited as a safety, at one point, and winds up coming in and having the career that he's had. Trevor Cardell has had some great moments to his career. And I'm not going to name every single player, but you get the point. There's a lot of them who have impacted the program in a lot of positive ways. By the way, somebody asked earlier, should Devin Neal get a statue?
Oh, yes, in the comments.
I would love.
Or Blind Justice, he gets a statue, right?
Yes.
I'm assuming yes.
So much for that.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm assuming yes. I mean, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't.
It was funny during today's game. I can't remember who said it. Somebody was said something like Devin Neal Field at David Booth Memorial Stadium or something like that.
I mean, it doesn't seem that outrageous.
No. And I think it's a combination of everything, though, right? It's obviously he's Kansas's all-time leading rusher, but and at a school, I might add, that has 2 NFL Hall of Fame running backs.
Yeah, but it goes so much more beyond that.
Yeah,
it goes so much more beyond his on the field production, right? The way he carries himself off the field, the way that he has, in the community as well.
Yep.
It goes so much more beyond just the box score, just the stats, just what he did on the field. For everything that he deserves. And obviously, then that kind of gets compounded by the fact that he's a Lawrence kid, right? I mean, this is his hometown. This is, I mean, not physically where we are right now, we're in Kansas City.
He talked about when he was getting ready to break the rushing record. He talked about how special that was to him, and he talked about, I think he said he had a James Sims poster in his room, and so. Yeah, I mean, it goes so far beyond just the production, but also the way he carries himself, what he's meant to the program. I realize I've mentioned this multiple times, but when we talked to Travis Goff when they hung sort of the last beam at the new booth, one of the things that he said was, Devin Neal was watching it and said, "Man, I wish I'd get to play here." And Goff said to him, he said, "Devin, you built it."
Yeah.
And so,
literally.
And so I would love it if they found a way at some point, some end, a plaza or something, to have a Devin Neal statue up there. I think that would be more than apt and would probably mean even more than, just having your name up there. There in the ring of honor. Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Yeah. You touched on Jalen Daniels there, and I don't really want to dive too deeply into it. I don't think it's worth really talking about too much right now. But obviously, he has the potential to come back. He did go through the senior day festivities today, but he could come back. But I think KU is approaching it the right way. He's approaching it the right way of hey, that's a conversation for the offseason.
Yeah,
that'll be something to deal with later. I think in terms of the fact that KU is still battling for a bowl game.
Sure, yeah, and I think that's the right approach, and it should be noted, Jalen wasn't the only guy listed as a junior.
There were lots of other guys. Yeah,
a lot of other guys also walked. Logan Brown would be a guy that walked as a senior today. I think they would love to have Logan Brown back next year. He's had a great year, Nick.
He was banged up today and played through it.
He was and played through it. And so they did have some guys that I think they would either expect and or hope to get back next year, go through those senior day festivities. And so it doesn't necessarily mean anything that he did, but it was kind of cool to see him do it, hear the emotion. Devin Neal was the guy that wrapped up the senior
and got
day
the loudest ovation.
And got just a really loud ovation. By the way, Nick, I want to get your thoughts. I thought this was a terrific crowd.
Oh,
today.
Absolutely.
Colorado fans turned out really well. If you're a Colorado fan and you're in here, you should be proud at your fans' turnout. But I also thought KU fans turned out in droves, and the noise level was excellent. I thought the crowd was terrific today.
Yeah. I think compared to the Iowa State crowd from the last home game, there was more KU fans, I think, this time. The split was certainly more in favor of KU for this game than it was for Iowa State. And there was a lot more KU fans too, I think. I never got a chance to see what the announced attendance was, but yeah, absolutely. I thought the crowd was fantastic. And it really goes to show this, I talked about it even 2, 3, 4 years ago. KU fans, KU football fans especially, in so many ways, especially during the decade of kind of futility that KU had, they're sleeping giant, right? Like this is a very, very passionate fan base that wants to care, that wants to get invested. That's just been burned many, many times, right?
Yeah.
And obviously kind of got burned this season early in the year as well, but they've still come back. That's the thing, is like, they're incredibly passionate, incredibly loyal, and they will show up. And they certainly did today. And I think if you ask any of the players and coaching staff, that the crowd was probably a factor in their energy level. I mean, throughout the entire game, we saw the players on the field hyping up the crowd, getting hyped, whatever, interacting with the crowd, and so on and so forth. So absolutely, I think if you were at the game, you did a great job, right? I mean, KU fans definitely did a great job. To kind of put a bow on this, Kevin, any final thoughts for KU? They're 5-6 now. They're going to go play a resurging Baylor team on the road in Waco to end the season for a chance at a bowl game. Any final thoughts really on kind of what happened here today?
No, this was perfect for Kansas. Like this was their best game of the season. And when you look at how physically they played, how tough they were, when you look at the game plan in terms of how much they used the run and they used the pass to kind of keep Colorado off balance. The defense, again, got stops in key situations and in big moments in the game. And so when you look at all of that, Nick, I think that's exactly what you want heading into that Baylor game. And I'm not saying, hey, you're going to play at this level, 2 games in a row, but I am saying Kansas now, you take over those last 4 games, you can even include the K-State loss in that one.
100%.
The way Kansas has played in those games, Nick, Kansas should have every chance to win against Baylor and Waco. And Baylor's playing really well right now.
Yeah.
I mean, they've certainly taken a step forward. They found a quarterback, which was a big part of it. And this week we'll obviously be breaking down Baylor in more detail. But I think that if Kansas comes out and plays the way that it did in this one, then there's no reason to think that Kansas can't get to bowl eligibility, which would be huge for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
One of which, of course, that added practice time for a roster that you're resetting. And so you're wanting a lot of young guys to get a lot of practice time during that, but also to have a chance to send out some of these seniors with a bowl game and their 3rd straight bowl game, something Kansas has never done before.
Yeah. Kevin, look, with Thanksgiving just around the corner, I'm thankful for KU football, thankful for you, and I'm thankful certainly for all of you that tuned in to join us here today live at Arrowhead Stadium. And for listening after the fact, I'm thankful for you as well. Be sure to subscribe, be sure to like, be sure to drop a comment. We are over 350 subscribers, approaching 400 on our YouTube channel, so be sure to subscribe over there. And if you're watching, listening, whatever it may be, drop a comment, share your thoughts, leave a 5-star rating and review, all of that good stuff. And we're going to be back breaking down Baylor coming up here pretty quick. It's a quick turnaround, sort of. I guess not really a quick turnaround, but with Thanksgiving week, things will be a bit more condensed on timing. So I hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving also, and we'll be back again more to break down Baylor and talk more KU football, KU basketball, all things happening with KU sports. But until then, enjoy this win. Kansas defeats Colorado 37-21. For Kevin Flaherty, I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.